The parking lot outside Harlan Defense Systems was mostly empty at 6:40 on a Tuesday morning. Long shadows crossed the pavement. The glass entrance doors were still dark. A banner stretched above the entrance canopy. Navy letters on white vinyl. Veteran hiring fair. Harlan Defense Systems. Open to all who served. One vehicle stood at the far end of the lot. A 2009 Chevy Silverado with a cracked passenger mirror and a bumper sticker faded past reading. A man sat on the hood with a manila folder across his knee and a thermos he had finished at 4 a.m. Beside him, a boy of 9 was eating a granola bar and watching a pigeon navigate the painted lines of a parking space. Raymond Cole had driven 6 hours to be here. He had ironed his shirt the night before in a truck stop bathroom, using a travel iron he kept behind the seat. He and his son had been in that lot since 9 o'clock the previous evening. They had slept in the truck. Eli finished the granola bar. He folded the wrapper into neat quarters, the way his father had taught him, and pressed it into his jacket pocket. Then he looked at the banner above the door. That says we're allowed. Raymond looked at it. It does. So we go in when they open. That's the plan. If you already feel it, that tightening in your chest, hit the like button and subscribe to Hidden Ledger. Drop a comment below and tell me where in the world you're watching from. Because this story is just getting started. And the part they don't see coming, keep watching. Eli nodded and went back to watching the pigeon. Raymond looked down at the folder. He had looked at it close to 100 times since midnight. The resume was correct. The reference letters were real. His discharge papers were behind the second tab, his commendations behind the third. Everything was in order. He had driven through the night because a hotel room was $78, and the folder was more important than the mattress. Eli had not asked about the hotel. He had fallen asleep in the passenger seat around Shawnee and woken up in the Harlan parking lot without a word of complaint. He was 9 years old and had his father's talent for understanding when questions had no useful answers. At 7:15, a black Audi pulled into the lot and parked near the main entrance. A man in a gray suit stepped out, perhaps 50, with the ease of someone accustomed to arriving first and finding things prepared. He scanned the lot the way people do when they expect to find it empty. His eyes found the Silverado, found Raymond, found Eli. He stopped. Then he changed direction. He crossed toward them with his hands in his pockets. "Sir," he said it the way people say it when they don't mean it. "This is private property. The hiring fair doesn't open until 9. Raymond looked at him. "I know. I'm here for the fair." The man glanced at the truck, at the bag visible through the rear window, at Eli. A decision settled behind his expression, fast and practiced. "You've been here overnight." "We have. This is a professional recruitment event. We have executive staff arriving this morning. Board members." A pause. "I'm going to need you to clear the property before we open. If you'd like to apply, there's an online portal." Raymond was quiet for a moment. "I drove from Tulsa. I understand." "There's a portal." Raymond held out the folder. "I have all my materials ready. Could I at least leave my resume?" The man took the folder. He opened it. He looked at the front page for 4 seconds. He closed it and handed it back. "We're looking for candidates who are positioned to perform at this level. I don't think today is the right fit." He turned toward the building. "Make sure the lot is cleared before we open." His name was Craig Dunmore. He was the Director of Human Resources at Harlan Defense Systems. He walked inside without looking back. Eli had stopped watching the pigeon. Raymond took the folder and sat back on the hood. He did not raise his voice. He did not move toward the building. He sat in a parking lot in Oklahoma at 7:20 in the morning, with his son beside him, and whatever was moving behind his face stayed behind it. He had a way of going still when the world handed him something unfair. Eli had seen it before, when the landlord in Bartlesville had told them the unit was no longer available 3 days after Raymond paid the deposit, when the contractor in Wichita had mailed back Raymond's application without comment. His father would go still in exactly this way, and then, after a moment, he would do whatever the next right thing was. He never explained the stillness. He just moved through it. Eli looked at the folder under his father's arm, then at the door through which Dunmore had disappeared. "He didn't read it," Eli said. "No, not even the first page?" "First page." Eli thought about that. He looked at the banner again. Then he climbed back onto the hood beside his father and sat there without saying anything else. Because some things didn't need commentary from a 9-year-old. They needed waiting. Raymond could wait. Raymond Cole had joined the Army at 19, out of Bartlesville, with no inheritance coming and no path anyone had cleared for him. He had made his own. He was selected for the 75th Ranger Regiment at 22, following a process that removed men who were stronger and turned away men who were faster. He did not break. He did not turn away. 19 years followed. 3 deployments to Afghanistan, 1 to Iraq. The rest in places that did not appear on the records most people were cleared to read. He reached the rank of sergeant major. He accumulated commendations the way some men accumulate years. Steadily, without ceremony, one decision at a time. He had not joined the Army looking for medals. He had joined because he needed a way forward, and the Army was one. He had stayed because he was good at the work, and because the work mattered in ways he could feel clearly, in the weight of responsibility, in the knowledge that the people beside him were counting on his judgment. He understood obligation from the inside. It was not a concept to him. It was the structure of his days. What he found on the outside, after 19 years, was that the structure was gone and the obligation had not moved with it. He still woke up early. He still thought in terms of what needed to happen and in what order, and who was depending on him to make sure it did. He still showed up. The difference was that showing up, on the outside, required first convincing someone to let you in the door. That part he had not been trained for. He was learning it, one door at a time, with varying results. In September 2009, during an operation in Kandahar province that the Army filed under a classification Raymond had never discussed outside a secured room, his 12-man team took a ridge position at 0300 hours. What was planned as a 6-hour hold extended to 11. A medevac helicopter was down 2 kilometers south. 3 of his men were too badly wounded to move under fire. 23 personnel needed extraction from a position that had no cover except what Raymond's team could provide. He held the ridge. With 4 rounds of ammunition per man remaining, he held it. The Silver Star citation described his actions in careful, measured language, the kind written by people who understand that words will always fall short of the thing being described. It noted his composure under sustained fire, his management of depleted resources, the decision he made, not under orders but on his own authority, to hold a fixed position rather than fall back, because falling back meant leaving people the extraction team could not reach without cover from above. 23 people were evacuated. Raymond's team took fire for another 3 hours before relief reached the ridge. When it was over, he wrote his after-action report in the same tone he used for everything else, factual and stripped of flourish, and said nothing to anyone about what had been required of him that was not already in the record. That citation was in the folder, behind the resume, behind the reference letters, in the section Craig Dunmore had not reached before he closed it and handed it back. Raymond's wife Danielle had died when Eli was 4. Ovarian cancer, late diagnosis, fast progression. Raymond had been finishing his final deployment when the news reached him. He made it home in time. He said, on the rare occasions anyone pressed him to name what he was most grateful for, that this was it. Not the rank, not the commendations. He made it home in time. After Danielle, he took his discharge and tried to build something on the outside. The skills that had mattered enormously in the places he had used them translated poorly onto resumes reviewed by people who had never been to those places. He knew how to lead men through terrain where the margin for error was measured in seconds. He knew how to assess a situation in the dark, with incomplete information, under conditions designed to prevent clear thinking. He knew how to take care of the people in his charge when the resources were less than what the task required. None of that fit cleanly into a job description box. He worked logistics for a trucking company in Tulsa for 14 months before it folded. He drove delivery routes for another 11. He applied to security contractors, defense consulting firms, and operations outfits across 3 states. The responses came back as polite form letters, or as nothing at all. He attended 2 hiring fairs in the prior year, both smaller than Harlan's, and left both of them without a conversation that led anywhere. He had not given up. He was not built for giving up, but he was aware, with the particular clarity of a man who had spent years reading situations accurately, that something in the system was not reading him back. 6 weeks before the Harlan Fair, something different arrived. Major General Leonard Marsh, Raymond's commanding officer during the Kandahar operation, retired from active duty the previous spring and now serving on the board of Harlan Defense Systems, had sent a letter to Harlan's HR department. He had written it himself, by hand on his personal stationery, before having it typed and formally submitted. He named Raymond Cole specifically. He described his record in terms that left very little ambiguity about what kind of officer, what kind of man, was being recommended. He said that Harlan would be fortunate to have him, and that he could speak to Raymond's character from personal observation in conditions that most resumes never required anyone to account for. That letter was also in the folder, behind the Silver Star citation, behind the section Craig Dunmore had not reached. Raymond hadn't known Marsh was on Harlan's board until 2 weeks before the fair, when Marsh called him directly. He had said the letter was already sent, that it should be in the system, and that Raymond should attend the fair and apply through the normal process. Raymond asked whether he should mention the letter. Marsh said his record spoke for itself and that it was Raymond's record, not the letter, that would determine the outcome. He told Eli they were going to Oklahoma for a job interview. Eli packed one change of clothes and the library book about deep-sea fish he had been slowly working through for a month. He didn't ask about the hotel. He already knew. This was what Raymond Cole was carrying on the hood of that truck. 19 years of service, a Silver Star, a folder no one had finished reading, and a 9-year-old boy who understood more about his father's life than most children should ever need to. At 8:10, the side door of the building opened, and a woman in a green blazer crossed the parking lot. She was perhaps 30, carrying 2 water bottles and a pack of peanut butter crackers, moving with the manner of someone who had decided to do something before she had time to talk herself out of it. "I saw from the window," she said. She held out the water and the crackers. "I'm sorry about this morning." Raymond looked at her for a moment. He took the water and handed one to Eli. "Thank you." She glanced at Eli, then back at Raymond. "The fair opens at 9. You're allowed to be in the lot." She said it quietly, like information someone should have been given earlier. Raymond thanked her. She went back inside. Her name was Gina Reeves. She worked the front desk. She had watched Dunmore cross the parking lot at 7:15 and seen the conversation end with Raymond and Eli back on the hood. She had been thinking about it for 40 minutes. She had no idea who Raymond Cole was, what the folder held, or what he had done 15 years ago in a province he had never described to anyone outside a secured room. She just saw a man and a boy who had been in that lot since before she arrived, and that seemed like something worth walking outside for. Other applicants started pulling in after 8 o'clock. They came in clean cars and newer jackets, with the particular alertness of people who had slept in beds. Several looked at the Silverado. A few looked at Raymond and Eli on the hood. Nobody said anything. They went inside, collected their lanyards from the welcome table, and filled out the visitor log with the practiced ease of people who had never needed to explain why they were in a parking lot. Raymond watched them go. He did not feel what an observer might have assumed he felt, looking at the gap between the Audi in the reserved space and the Silverado at the back of the lot. He felt patience. He had learned a long time ago, in places that had no patience for impatience, that what a situation looked like from the outside and what it actually was were rarely the same thing. Dunmore had looked at the truck and decided what Raymond was. That was Dunmore's problem. Raymond knew what was in the folder. He would wait. Between 8 o'clock and 8:30, 7 more applicants arrived. Raymond watched each of them. He watched the way they moved through the entrance without pausing, without having to ask permission, without standing outside in the morning air waiting for someone to decide their clothing was acceptable. He watched and said nothing and felt nothing about it that needed to be said. He had been in situations before where the gap between his position and someone else's was the distance between an order and the person carrying it out. He understood the mechanics of hierarchy. He had worked inside them his whole life. What he had never learned to accept, and had no intention of learning, was the assumption that the hierarchy said something true about the person at the bottom of it. He looked at Eli. Eli was reading the deep-sea fish book, balanced on his knee on the hood of the truck. He had marked his page with a folded piece of notebook paper. He had brought 3 pieces of notebook paper as bookmarks. Raymond knew, because he lost bookmarks and he planned ahead. At 8:30, Raymond climbed down from the hood and straightened his shirt. He ran a hand over his hair. He told Eli to stay close. They walked to the entrance. The security guard at the door was young, maybe 25, and he had the look of someone who had been given an instruction he was not entirely comfortable enforcing. "Sir, I've been asked to hold the door until HR clears each visitor individually. The fair opens at 9. The banner says, "Open to all who served." "I understand, sir. I'm sorry. It's not up to me." Raymond looked at him for a moment, and something in his expression told the guard that he understood exactly how it felt to be handed an order you didn't write. He did not push. He stood at the entrance with Eli beside him, the folder under his arm, and he waited. At 8:58, a silver sedan turned into the lot and parked in the space marked reserved, Board of Directors. A man stepped out, 62 years old, broad across the shoulders, gray hair cut short. The posture of someone who had spent 3 decades in uniform and would carry it in his spine for the rest of his life. He wore a dark blue suit, carried a leather briefcase, and moved with the unhurried certainty of a man who had not been in a hurry since the day he retired, which was the day he stopped needing to be. He was Major General Leonard Marsh. He had driven from Edmond for a scheduled board meeting at 10 o'clock. He was arriving early, because he always arrived early. He crossed the lot toward the entrance and slowed when he passed the Silverado. He looked at the cracked mirror, the faded bumper sticker, the 2 water bottles on the hood, and the folded granola bar wrapper beside them. He kept walking, and then, standing at the entrance with a folder under his arm and a boy at his side, was a face he had not seen in 12 years and recognized without hesitation. Raymond Cole. Marsh stopped. If this story found its way to you, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. Hidden Ledger posts new stories every week, and the one after this one is already waiting. Your support is what keeps the ledger open. Raymond saw him. He straightened. "General Marsh." Marsh looked at the lobby door, at the security guard, at Dunmore, visible through the glass near the registration tables, then at Raymond, at the folder. "How long have you been here?" "Since last night, sir." Marsh's face did not move into anger. Something came through it that was quieter than anger, more deliberate. He held out his hand. "Give me the folder." Raymond handed it over without a word. Marsh opened it. He turned past the resume. He found his own letter, on his own stationery, sent 6 weeks ago to Harlan's Human Resources Department. In the upper corner, a yellow post-it note had been stuck and pressed flat. 3 words in someone's handwriting. "Online portal." Marsh read it twice. He removed the note and placed it in his jacket pocket. He looked at the silver star citation beneath the letter. He did not need to read it. He had written part of the recommendation himself. He closed the folder and held it out to Raymond. Then he looked at the security guard. "Open the door." The guard looked toward the lobby. "Son," Marsh said, quietly and without a syllable of doubt. "Open the door." It opened. Marsh walked inside. He did not go to reception. He did not stop at the welcome table. He walked through the lobby toward the cluster of HR staff assembled near the hiring fair registration area, and asked, in a voice shaped by 30 years of being heard clearly in very loud places, for Craig Dunmore. Dunmore appeared from around a partition space. He had the alertness of someone who had been watching the entrance. Marsh held the yellow post-it note between 2 fingers. "Whose handwriting is this?" Dunmore looked at it. He looked at Raymond, who had come inside with Eli and was standing near the front desk. He looked back at Marsh. "General Marsh, I can explain the situation. The candidate was camping in our parking lot with a child, and based on what I observed, the circumstances didn't suggest a fit for the level we're recruiting at. I asked about the handwriting." A pause. "That would be mine. The letter was received, but based on the candidate's apparent situation, I didn't feel it warranted advancing him through the process. The letter came from me." Marsh set the folder on the reception desk and opened it to the letter. "I sent it to this office 6 weeks ago. I described the candidate's service record in specific terms and recommended him for a senior operations role." He turned the page. "I'll tell you what I left out of the letter, because I believed it went without saying. In September 2009, in Kandahar province, this man held a ridge for 11 hours, with 4 rounds of ammunition per man, remaining so that 23 personnel could be evacuated safely. He made that decision on his own authority. No order required him to stay. He stayed because leaving meant those people died." Marsh looked at Dunmore without raising his voice. "You handed his folder back to him in a parking lot because of the truck he was sleeping in." The room was quiet. 2 board members had appeared at the edge of the conference room. The HR staff near the registration tables had not moved. Gina Reeves stood at the front desk, with her hands above her keyboard, and did not type. Dunmore began to talk about consistency, about the integrity of the hiring process. about what it would mean for other candidates if certain applicants received preferential access. He used the word optics twice. He said that the program was designed to give veterans a fair shot through structured channels, which was exactly what the online portal was there to provide. He said this with the confidence of someone who had said it before to people who could not push back. Marsh let him finish. The portal, Marsh said, is what someone writes on a post-it note when they've already decided. He looked at the HR staff along the wall. Several of them had stopped pretending to look at anything else. The letter I sent to this office described a man's service record in specific terms. It described a specific event, a specific decision, a specific outcome. It asked that he be considered for a specific role. He looked back at Dunmore. The answer was a yellow note stuck to a folder that went back to a man sitting in a parking lot. That is not a process. That is a closed door with a polite label. Marsh said, that man held a ridge so your board members could get home to their families. Open the fare. One sentence. The room received it the way rooms receive things that cannot be walked back. Not because of rank, though the rank was present. Because of what it named. Specifically, without decoration. 23 people, 11 hours, 4 rounds. A man who chose to stay when staying was the only thing that kept other people alive. Dunmore said nothing else. Marsh picked up the folder and crossed the lobby. He held it out to Raymond. You'll need this in there. He glanced at Eli, who was standing near the reception desk, looking at a framed photograph of an F-35 mounted on the wall. He waiting for you? Comes everywhere with me, Raymond said. Marsh looked at him for a moment. You should have called me. Raymond met his eye. Wanted to come through the front door. Marsh nodded once. Come through the front door. Craig Dunmore was no longer at Harlan Defense Systems by 10 o'clock that morning. He was asked to step into a conference room while a board member made 2 calls. By 9:50, he was escorted to his office to collect his personal belongings. His access card was deactivated before lunch. His name was removed from the organizational chart before the hiring fair closed. An internal review began the next morning. It confirmed what the post-it note had already announced to anyone willing to read it. Dunmore had received General Marsh's letter 6 weeks earlier, looked at enough of it to form a judgment, and moved on. The review also found 3 similar communications from senior veterans advocacy organizations in the prior 2 years, all recommending specific candidates by name, all marked with the same note in the same handwriting, all resulting in no follow-up contact with the candidates. 3 people, recommended by people who had watched them serve, quietly rerouted to a form on the internet that nobody followed up on. All 3 were contacted within the week. 2 of them accepted roles before the month ended. Dunmore did not receive a severance package. The board resolution authorizing his termination was passed in a session that lasted 11 minutes. None of the board members who voted had been in the parking lot that morning. They had not needed to be. They had read the post-it note and the Silver Star citation side by side, and the math was not complicated. Raymond was brought into a room off the lobby within the hour, where Harlan's vice president of operations was already waiting because Marsh had made a call from the lobby before the fair opened. The conversation lasted 2 hours. Raymond answered questions directly and without embellishment, the way he had always spoken. No inflation, no performance, just the record and what it demonstrated. The VP had the folder open on the table in front of him the whole time. Twice he paused and reread the Silver Star citation. He did not comment on it. He just read it, and then looked at the man across the table, and continued. By the end of the conversation, Raymond had an offer. Director of Veteran Operations Integration, a role that had existed on Harlan's org chart for 3 years without a person inside it who had ever done the work from the inside out. The salary was $94,000. Full benefits. Relocation assistance to Oklahoma City. While it was happening, Eli sat near Gina's desk with his book about deep-sea fish. She asked him which deep-sea creatures had the most dangerous teeth. He considered the question with appropriate seriousness and gave her a thorough answer that covered the viperfish, the fangtooth, and the dragonfish, with specific notes on jaw-to-body size ratio. She asked follow-up questions. He was glad someone was taking it seriously. "Do you think my dad's doing okay in there?" he asked, after a while. "Yeah," Gina said. "I think he's doing really well." When Raymond came back out into the lobby, he saw Gina at her desk. He stopped. "You brought water this morning," he said. She looked slightly surprised. "You'd been out there a while." Raymond glanced toward the conference room, then back at her. I'm going to need people who notice things when I put this program together. I'd like you to be part of it." She said yes before he finished the sentence. The internal review's final report went to the board 4 weeks later. It recommended a permanent oversight process for all external letters from senior military officers or veterans organizations, a required intake log, a mandatory response timeline of no more than 10 business days, and the name of whoever received each letter attached to the record from the moment it arrived. A record that would remain open, an account that could not be quietly closed without a name attached to the closing. 3 months after the fair, Raymond and Eli moved into a house in Edmond, 12 minutes from Eli's new school. It was a rental, but Raymond had signed a year's lease, and there was a backyard large enough for Eli to set up the telescope he'd been asking about since 4th grade. Gina Reeves coordinated the first cohort through Harlan's new integration track. 14 veterans placed in permanent roles by the end of that year. She kept a handwritten list of their names on a card at her desk and added to it as the program grew, and crossed nothing out. Raymond spent his first months in the role doing what he had always done, showing up, doing the work, letting the work speak. He built the program from documentation up, the way Marsh had once taught him to build a position: establish what you know, record what you find, and never sign off on something you haven't personally checked. He developed a candidate intake process that gave every veteran applicant a human point of contact within 48 hours of submission. He staffed it with people who had served. He called it basic, because it was. He presented the program's 90-day results to the board in November, standing at the front of a conference room in the same building where he'd stood near the front desk 11 weeks earlier, with a folder nobody had read. He was not the kind of man who called attention to the symmetry. He presented the results. The results said it for him. At home, things settled in the way that things settle when a child finally has the same room 2 nights running. Eli arranged his deep-sea fish books on a shelf above his desk. He started a notebook of fish he wanted to learn about, organized by depth zone. He asked Raymond once whether they were staying. Raymond told him they were staying. Eli nodded and went back to his notebook and did not ask again. General Marsh visited Harlan twice that fall and had lunch with Raymond both times. Each time he told a version of the same story, which was not really about Raymond, but about a ridge and a decision, and 23 people who made it home because one man chose to stay. Each time Raymond listened the same way, looking at the table, without comment, as though the story had happened to someone he once knew. Eli came to the office once in November. Gina brought him in on a morning when Raymond was presenting to the full board. He sat in the back of the conference room in a chair slightly too large for him, and watched his father stand at the front of a room of executives and speak in the same measured voice he used for everything, as though volume had nothing to do with what words weighed. A board member came over afterward and shook Eli's hand. She asked whether he'd known his father had received the Silver Star. Eli thought about it for a moment. He had the careful look of a child turning something over that he had been thinking about for a while. He was always that, Eli said. He just needed someone to open the door. Thank you for staying until the balance was restored. The people who watch to the end are the ones who understand why the ledger matters. If this story stayed with you, the videos on your screen right now are ready to do the same. And if you haven't subscribed yet, the ledger has your name. Hidden Ledger, every account settles.